Hey everybody, it is absolutely my pleasure and excitement to introduce to you this next talk. This one is a debate, and we'll do it a little bit differently because what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce to you the moderator, and she is going to go ahead and introduce to you the two speakers. You probably know them, so they don't actually need an introduction, but I know she's going to do a great job anyway. So the talk is called The Great Debate About the New View in Safety. And it is my pleasure to introduce to you to Karen Studi. She's the Senior Director of Personal Safety and Industrial Hygiene Expertise at the Dow Chemical Company. She has over 20 years in chemical process safety management, including fault tree analysis, HAZOP, layer of protection analysis, quantitative risk assessment, safety instrumented system analysis, incident investigations, and security vulnerability analysis. 8 years prior, she was in chemical production engineering, design, startup, and research. She holds 2 patents for methacrylates production design improvements. She has written numerous articles on the subjects of process safety management, LOPA, inherent safety, and management of change. Since 2012, she has been a session chair for the Process Plant Safety Symposium and was the symposium chair in 2015. In 2021, she is chairing the Global Congress on Process Safety. She holds a black belt in Krav Maga and teaches women's self-defense and cardio kickboxing. Holy smokes. With that, Karen, it is absolutely my pleasure to please give it to you and take it away. Thank you.
Welcome to the debate to end all safety debates, Corrie versus Todd. I'm very happy to be here with you as the debate moderator. My name is Karen Studi. I'm Director of Personal Safety and Industrial Hygiene Expertise at Dow Chemical. In case you don't know Todd and Corrie, I'll share a few facts about them first. So Todd Conklin holds a PhD in organizational behavior from the University of New Mexico. Todd spent 25 years at Los Alamos National Laboratory as a senior advisor for organizational and safety culture. The last 15 of those 25 years, he has been working on the Human Performance Program. Todd's book, Pre-Accident Investigations, An Introduction to Organizational Safety, is a best-selling book on safety. Todd has several other books and a huge podcast following for his twice-weekly podcast of the same name. If you haven't caught Todd on YouTube or his podcast, I highly recommend it. Next, Corrie Pitzer is the CEO and founder of SafeMap International, a company specializing in the psychology of risk, leadership, and safety culture. Corrie consults internationally to many corporations which share one thing in common: occupations in which people can be seriously injured or killed in their line of work. Corrie enjoys activities such as skydiving and rally car driving. He was an underground miner and an infantry platoon commander. All that kind of makes him a specialist in risk rather than safety. Corrie has a bachelor's and honors degrees in industrial psychology, honors degree in business management, an MBA, graduate diploma in education, and is a registered psychometrist. However, Corrie rates his mining blasting ticket as his highest qualification. So welcome again to the debate to end all safety debates, Corrie versus Todd. So Corrie, I'm going to get us kicked off now with a question for you.
Okay.
So I've heard you mention that our accident analysis tools and techniques are obsolete. So tell me, what exactly is wrong with them?
Well, okay. Let me see if I can do that in a short space of time. I definitely think our analysis techniques are obsolete. The first reason I think that is that it is based on an analytical tools and techniques that is much more suited to the engineering world. In an engineering world, when something goes wrong, it is possible to find the original cause of that, and then it's possible to find the cause of that, and the cause of that, and the cause of that, until you get to the original cause, which is called the root cause. So it's very much machine thinking. But in our environment, in the safety context, is the social technical environment. There are so many, I think probably iterative factors, pressures and interactions between people, and all these kind of factors are creating an environment where there is no simplicity, there is no original cause. Everything is a root cause. And we just don't have the tools in safety to actually deal with that kind of complexity or non-linearity, so to speak. I have looked at a few analytical tools, and there are, things like Eric Holnagel's FRAM, Functional Resonance and Analysis Method. And there are others too. But if you start using them on an incident, it is like, it's just too complex. You just can't make sense of them in the end, and you're exhausted at the end of that. Imagine having to apply those kind of complex tools to complex events and just never have bang for your buck in the end. That's really the problem with it. The second reason why I think it's obsolete is because we cannot escape the criminalization of our analysis. There is legalities, there's legal blame inherent in it because an accident happened. There's just the societal legal process, contaminates that process of investigation rather than analysis. So in that kind of investigation process, there is major loss of information. People, everyone, the supervisor, the worker, everyone has to cover themselves in glory in order not to be the victim of blame here. So it's a really complex situation from that perspective. And then finally, for me, I think learning from accidents, learning from incidents itself is obsolete. We don't want to learn from incidents that already happened. There are much more progressive ways of looking at it. And so even if we can really make the investigation process a positive analysis activity, we're still dealing with reactive learning. And to me, that it sucks up so much energy in an organization that's why I believe it. If it isn't obsolete, it should be. So that's my view on that.
That's a pretty controversial view. Very interesting, though, because people love their incident investigations, don't they?
Yes.
Spend a lot of time and energy on it. Well, thank you, Corrie. So Todd, I have a question for you now. So both you and Corrie criticize the behavioral approach, but we've been using it for years, and we have seen some improvements. Sometimes people, they just do the wrong thing. So wouldn't the behavioral approach help in that situation?
It's a really good question, right? I mean, and one of the interesting things about the behavioral approach is that it assumes on the surface that the worker's the problem. And so your comment, sometimes people just do the wrong things. That's a really interesting comment, because what does wrong mean? And when does wrong get determined? And who determines what wrong is? Now, if they're sociopaths and they're breaking the law, and you're hiring people that actually come to work to hurt other people, I would suggest you suck at hiring people, right? I mean, that's more of a personnel issue than a safety issue. But the interesting difference is that ultimately the behavioral approach assumes that workers are the problem and they need to be controlled. And one of the lessons we learn early, whether you raise kids or dogs or whatever, is that we don't get to be in charge of our workers' behaviors. They're in charge of their behaviors. We're in charge of the environment in which the work happens. We're in charge of the systems in which the work is done. And that idea, I think, is a predominantly new idea. And it scares people who have vested interest in the belief that controlling behavior has made all the difference. I would suggest, and you guys are a great example, is I would suggest that while you've been on this journey to become safer at Dow Chemical, that you've changed lots of things, and that your procedures are better, your process safety is better, your safety leadership's better, leadership as a whole is better, the organization's better. You have a much richer understanding of what safety is. And I think it sometimes is sort of a confounding variable that we did that by simply monitoring workers' behavior. So the question I would ask, and it's always not a very popular question, is do you have a behavioral problem? And it's a really good question. You may have a problem with risk. You may have a problem with harm. You may have a problem with failure, but do you actually have a behavioral problem? And part of the journey, this is going to be the worst debate ever, by the way, because Corrie and I agree on everything. But part of the journey is really helping organizations let go of probably what is the best thing I could think to call it is kind of magical thinking. And what it is it's the classic sort of Hawthorne effect. And the Hawthorne effect, if you remember from sociology, says an observed worker is going to be more careful because you're observing them. Right. And so we know there's really good research on that. And the Hawthorne effect is actually a fun one to look at. If you've never looked up an old paper, it's a really good one to look at, involving turning up the lights so they could observe the workers. And then they noticed when the lights were brighter, work got better. Well, you can make a pretty good case that when the lights are brighter, you can see more. I mean, there's a lot of confounding variables there. Ultimately, I think the challenge is that asking workers to be more safe in a very complex environment, the one that Corrie was just talking about, a non-linear complex environment where risk is constantly in motion, isn't a really good way to actually do work safer. It assumes that every mistake that happened was a choice. But what I think is so interesting is that sometimes the wrong thing is the right thing. And sometimes the right thing is the wrong thing. And it's all really contingent upon context. Context is the big driver in this equation. It's a good question, though.
If I can, and I want to agree with Todd, is we agree on most things, but I hope this debate will be a debate about, how we should be doing things and how we have been doing things. And I really want to support what he said, because in safety, we look at the human as the problem, as Todd said, and yet we don't have the approach to look at the worker as what I call the strongest link in the safety chain. It's only people, only humans at the front end that can really see those risks in motion, to identify them, respond to them in great ways. So to me, that's a powerful difference. And Todd has been talking about this and writing about this and dealing with this for a long time. So I think the whole issue of behavioral safety remains a topical one.
Well, and I think it's controversial because people have sunk cost in it. So they're committed to it. We've spent a lot of money. We have a really fancy program, and we've actually told leadership that this program is the reason we're safer. And so they've got this emotional investment in the worker being the problem. And it's really hard to let that go. I mean, that's a difficult thing to let go. And then there's lots of companies, fewer now than there probably were, but there's lots of companies who want to sell you an off-the-shelf program that actually monitors worker behavior. And the idea that you can actually observe safe and unsafe acts is compelling. I mean, that's sexy as can be. I mean, that's really seductive. The problem is no act without the benefit of context is really explainable. So I mean, it's crazy, but you can make a case for everything. And the belief that somehow this makes the world a better place, they've sold that idea pretty effectively. But I would actually ask you, is the improvements that have happened in your company, are they a direct result of your workers being safer? Or are they a direct result of you really thinking about safety differently as an organization? And my guess is, if you really held the mirror up, it's probably the changes you made in your safety program that have been more impactful than the number of unsafe acts you've observed.
That's a good point, and there's no way to prove exactly what it is that has helped us on our journey by itself, because it's not in isolation. There's all the confounding factors you mentioned. But when I look at a simple behavior that we've been focused on recently in my company. It's tying off when you're supposed to at elevated work. I mean, that's a specific behavior we can observe. We try to influence people to do what we consider the right thing. That's just a very one example. So
let me ask you a question on that, because I think that's a great example. How easy is it for them to tie off?
that's a great question. And
Because what I find is people will tie off, but oftentimes, like especially in maintenance activities or special cases where they're on top of something that they don't normally go on top of. So there's not handrails, there's not catwalks, there's the kind of normal engineered stuff that we'd put up there isn't there. What I find oftentimes is that it's actually really difficult to actually tie off, and they can't tie off appropriately, or the work itself doesn't allow the harness they're wearing to be functional. And so it's funny when you start looking at the system and you start saying, have we made it easy to tie off? Then that becomes a much different question, because if it's easy to be safe, people will be safe. I mean, because we're human beings. I mean, we're nothing if we're not fundamentally, what's the word I want, Corrie? I want to say the word lazy. Oh, I know what I want. We're nothing if we're not fundamentally efficient, which you can.
Yeah, that's a good word.
I'm glad you said that.
Principle of least effort.
No, that's exactly what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to that level of, are we making it easy for them? Are we setting people up for success? And I'm glad to see we're getting to that level instead of just blaming you didn't tie off. So
yeah,
I appreciate
and that's
that.
Systemic. That's not behavioral. Very true.
Yeah, and there's always going to be a compelling reason, because most people are not going to risk their lives to tighten a bolt. I mean, they just won't. So they think at the time, in the moment, given the past history, given the context of the environment, there's all sorts of factors in there that are well above and beyond classic behavioral choice. The problem with behavioral-based safety is assumes everything's a choice, and almost nothing's a choice. Or, as I sort of say all the time, we assume the workers are making bad choices. What we discover, and the tie-off example is really a great example of this, is that actually what they have is bad choices. They're not making bad choices. They just don't have good choices.
Thank you. That's great. Corrie, I want to change subjects a bit and talk about modernization. So we have artificial intelligence and digitization. People are really abuzz about how we can harness this and modernize our tools to take advantage of artificial intelligence and digitization. So can we do that? If we do, would it be good for safety, or is this something we should avoid?
I'm a great supporter of technology. I think technology, the engineering sciences, the computer sciences, they're really streaking ahead with incredible capabilities. So it has a huge potential upside for us. And if you talk about things like artificial intelligence, at this stage, everybody is talking about it, and everybody says that they are doing AI, and I'm not too sure about that, because that's a really high level of computational capability. But if we are capable of doing that, we will be able to generate incredible sources of data and quantity and quality of data. And we will certainly go forward in great strides. What we just need to be careful about is that this whole thing about big data is a big thing now in big companies. That, we've got lots of accidents, we've got lots of information that we can analyze or we can start predicting. And I believe, I may be out of my league here, but I believe that's absolute nonsense to start thinking that you can use that amount of data, because that amount of data, that big data that they have, is actually still minuscule data. They are based on, for every accident happens, there's been millions and millions of decisions that went wrong and right, and circumstances and context. We don't have big data. We actually have minuscule data put together, and we think that's big data, and we want to extrapolate from that. That's the one problem. The other problem is the data we have is not the data that will tell us anything about the risks in the workplace. I've recently completed a program over 2 years for a company, a very large company, on elimination of fatalities. And we visited 41 sites in this process. And we engage with people, over 8,000 people we engage with, to talk to them about the risks in their environment. And the things that they've uncovered there was absolutely mind-boggling. Over 2,000 potential risks, SIF risks, serious injury or failure risks, have been identified in this process. And very few of those risks that we've identified would appear in any data piece. These are things that hasn't happened yet. Not even a near miss, or it's way before that. So big data is not going to catch that kind of information ever, no matter how good we are. And to me, that's, Todd mentioned earlier about the motion of risk. The motion and speed and complexity of risk in this coming environment is going to be at exponential level. And so I'm not sure there's going to be this interface possible. But more worrying than anything for me is the human response to technology. And there's this classic concept of risk homeostasis, risk compensation. And I've seen it in action on mining companies in South Africa, where they've really made big strides with proximity alert systems to every worker. The whole site, 5,000 people, are carrying proximity alert systems. And to me, it was so obvious how they have become literally totally desensitized on it. They were just not paying attention to it. The alerts were going off. They couldn't interpret it afterwards. The technology has got a great upside, but the interface of humans with it, that to me is a huge unknown. So we don't know what we don't know yet in terms of risk and how the whole thing will work out in terms of risk perceptions and how the organization will actually be able to cope with this kind of workforce that probably became pedestrians on steroids, if I can put it like that. So to me, there's some real concerns about it, but of course we are capable. If we can generate the right systems and the right approaches in the organization, then I see a big upside on automation, digitization, and all these great technologies coming our way.
But the caution has to be, if I can translate what Corrie just said, the caution has to be the classic sort of software development term, garbage in, garbage out. And the problem is now is that we want to translate, you probably get these calls all the time, Corrie, I do too. We want to translate all the old behavioral observation data and make it predictive using some kind of advanced computing system. It's not really AI, but it's really a sort of an advanced tracking and trending system. And Corrie's exactly right. The data we need to collect is enormous, because what we ought to be looking at is how normal work is done. And we would need giant supercomputing capability to track all the normal work, because mostly what workers do in a varying environment is adaptively create success in real time. That's really going to be difficult data to collect. But I would sort of take us to self-driving vehicles. So self-driving vehicles have multiple dozens of sensors that are collecting data multiple times per second. And what they're collecting is what normal looks like. That's how self-driving cars self-drive, is they're constantly monitoring in microseconds, the milliseconds. I mean, they have thousands and thousands and thousands of inputs per second just to monitor what normal is. And so this is it's very seductive, because wouldn't it be great to be able to have an algorithm that would somehow tell you where your next accident will be? But in fact, if we put bad data in, then we're going to get crap results out. And right now, most of the programs are looking at behavioral observation data because it's easy to collect. And we already have sort of a culture that collects it. And I would suggest that's not helpful.
Well, along those same lines, Todd, so if it's not observations and trending, how do we know if we're safe? So how do we accurately measure safety, or will we ever be able to?
Well, so there's an absence of a null set. So when you say that, that's kind of an egghead thing to say, but basically you can't measure something that doesn't happen. And the challenge with safety is that we've defined safety traditionally around managing accidents, So I would suggest for us to actually have the discussion of how we measure safety, the first discussion we have to have is how we define safety. And safety is not the absence of an accident. Safety is actually the presence of capacity in a system to manage real-time variability coming a mile a minute. And so we have to first redefine safety, not as an outcome, but as sort of a process, a capacity. I wish I could think of it. The best word I've heard for this is operational tolerance. And so what you should assess is how much operational tolerance is in your program to manage normal variability. And that actually becomes a really interesting way to look at it, but it throws everything into some kind of topsy-turvy because all the systems we use now count injuries. And so you guys know this at Dow Chemical, you pretty much determine what your best sites are and what your worst sites are based upon the number of people they hurt, which means every site in any company is one ankle sprain away from being the worst site in the company. But that's not a very fair or accurate representation of how safe they are. When in reality, what you want to look at is how much capacity does your company have, or does a facility in your company have to manage an uncertain event? And that actually becomes it's a really novel way to look at and understand and measure how companies function. But that means we got to change everything. I mean, everything has to change.
I've had a question to support what Todd just said. I had a question like just what you asked there from an executive one day. How would we know that we've arrived in this transformation process? And my answer to her was, if you know that you've arrived in safety, you certainly have not arrived. You've arrived at the wrong place.
If you're there, you're not there.
If you're there, you're not there.
Okay. Thank you, Todd and Corrie. Corrie, I want to get to one of my favorite topics, psychological safety. I really enjoy thinking of psychological safety and how we can improve it. And it's all over everywhere. Every time you tune into a webcast, it seems like they're talking about it. What my question for you is psychological safety the next new panacea for safety?
I think it's actually, yeah. You know, when you look at these waves of buzzwords coming through our industry, and Todd and I have both been long enough around to know and to have seen a few, but you know, when behavioral safety was the big thing, everybody in the world is a behavioral expert. You know, then if the new view of safety becomes the topical issue, everybody's a new view expert, or they change their t-shirts to hop expert or culture coaches. And now we really have the emerging psychological safety expert, and they're really the same people in many ways. You know, it's in a way, psychological safety has been in a long time in the making. It's been around for a long time, and I'll mention that in a moment. But what does it mean? It means we are comfortable to speak up and out, to confront issues, to dare to differ, which in itself is risk-taking, courage to take a risk in a workplace. So we actually have to make the organization more capable of risk-taking, in essence, to make that behavior happen. But that's not how the safety world focuses. The safety world is focused on we make everything safe and less risky. And so in the safety world, you know, all organizations, they want to hear that they're not hurting people, just like we talked about earlier on. We are so hardwired for hearing good news in an organization that, you know, we want to have zero harms and zero this and zero that. We actually want zero bad news, which means that we are developing what I call risk secrecy. And I've spent the last couple of decades now on really indulging in organizations that The word I use for them is near zero organizations. Organizations that have been exemplary in safety performance, but then had catastrophic events, black swan events. You know, the most classic one is the Deepwater Horizon. I love this little video clip where they say they've worked 7 years without an injury, 7 years without an injury on an oil rig. And yet BP was on the rig congratulating them for that, for the good news that they're producing. And this is not psychological safe. Psychological safe means bad news reaching the top. It reminds me of a guy that I met on a mine site, and he's a dozer driver, and he's not very well educated. And I asked him, so what is safety about for you on this site? And he said, safety on this site is all about management lying to us, and we are lying to management. And that was to me such a beautiful statement about not psychological safe. But if you have a look at psychological safety, you know, what's the origin of it? It's like almost this is a new thing, but James Reason had defined this a long time ago, what he called types of culture. You know, a flexible culture, just culture, a learning culture. All of those are actually, or you know, what we ideally put as psychological safety. And so it's been around for a long time. You know, and I think, and you know, if I can make a plug for Todd's book, The 5 Principles of Human Performance Management, is essentially about psychological safety. Things that he says in there is fix the work, not the worker, blame, fix nothing. Response to failure is really what will drive your culture in your organization. So this is not a new thing. So my worry is that it's going to get a new label, and it has got a new label, and it's going to be just talked about, and then until a new label arrives, and then we are back where we were, and people change T-shirts again. So I'm a bit skeptical about it, because it is something that's about good, solid leadership in an organization that has been in existence for a long time.
I'm excited because that's the most accurate description I've heard of psychological safety, as Amy Edmondson from Harvard writes it up, that I've heard. Corrie, you hit it right on the nose. What worries me is most people hear psychological safety, but they haven't read anything. They haven't really looked at it. They don't know what they're talking about. And so they assume it's a warm, fuzzy place where everybody feels, you know, I feel safe. This is a safe place. When in fact, the point is how easy is it for workers to give you bad news? How open are you as an organization to diverse ideas, conflict? How open are you to having the edges of the envelope pushed as hard as they can be pushed? And friction. Yeah, friction. And that is, in fact, a key component to organizations that are successful. And that's the definition, or that's a very important way to look at the idea of psychological safety in a meaningful way for groups that want to actually do work. I think it goes back to this idea that it's, your story's beautiful. They lie to us, we lie to them. I mean, the question I would ask a management team is, what is it that you're collectively ignoring? And why are you collectively ignoring it? And if it's a safe place to have that conversation, that's an easy conversation to have.
That's great. It's all about how leaders accept bad news, how they deal with it. Very good. Okay, I want to shift gears a little bit and go to Todd. A question about safety management and operational management. So they're two different things, but can they really be integrated and work together?
So it depends. It depends how I keep saying the same crap all the time, but it really depends what we determine. So in my mind, there never should be a difference between operational management systems and safety management systems. In fact, I think it's kind of dumb that we have these independent individual safety management systems, because it assumes that safety is one part of the work that can be managed separately. Safety is a function of how operations do operation, right? And so ultimately, the systems have to be the same, because at the worker level, there is no different. Like half of the person's brain isn't ops and half of their brain isn't safety, and they switch between. They're solving all problems at the same time: environment, operations, production, safety, human resources. They're doing all those things all the time at the same time. The only place it makes sense for it to be separate, I guess, is around the management conference room table. Or maybe I should make that more contemporary, around the management Zoom meeting, right? Because then there is a person who's in charge of ops, and there's another person who's in charge of safety, and there's another person who's maybe in charge of production or environment or whatever. Those are pretty artificial separations. And I understand from a business management standpoint why we'd separate them. But at the pointy end of the stick where the workers work, those artificial separations don't exist. And so my answer, as cheesy as it is I don't think we should. I think every operational management system should be the safety management system.
Excellent response. And I completely agree. I think they have to be intertwined. Right. So Corrie, let's talk about culture, specifically safety culture. I don't think anyone would argue that safety culture is very real. The question I have is that, can that safety culture be measured, managed, and changed? And if so, how do we go about doing that?
Yes, it's very real. And the more important question is, can we actually measure it? When you look at culture and how it's defined, and everybody's got a culture t-shirt on these days, culture coaches as well. But it is a lens through which you look at your organization, and it's the same lens with which your organization is looking at you and inside the team. So can we actually measure that lens? And so, for instance, in the same exercise I went through for the past 2 years, one of the questions I would ask, we had 18 questions that we asked people, without them knowing we're asking them questions, to identify just where is the organization in terms of cultural maturity. And one of the questions we asked them is, why do you think your leadership wants to be safe? And so when we start off the process with the management team, we ask them, why do you want to be safe? And then we ask the workers, why do you think management wants to be safe? And the diversion is also the degree of immaturity. If they answer they want to be safe because they want a good safety record, or they want to impress the head office, etc., while the management says, oh no, we want safety because we want every worker to go home in the same way. That story which I really irritates me. Worker goes home in the same way they came to work. That difference is the lens. And so, can it be measured? I think as in terms of measuring something like that, you're measuring perceptions. I think, unfortunately, the whole process has been completely trivialized by the advent of things like SurveyMonkey, where people are just generating questions to ask workers, and they send them a link, and they get on a scale from 1 to 5, agree, disagree. And the lack of science in that is mind-boggling. To measure that perception, you actually have to measure people's intuitive response. You cannot let people sit and think about it, because then they start to think about what should they answer, and all kinds of biases come in. So can it be measured? With great difficulty. And I won't go too much into the detail of this, but this is based on the work of Daniel Kahneman, for me, thinking fast and slow. We want to measure people when they think fast. And there are ways of doing that. But it's also the way that you draft your survey instrument. It's not a simple tool to just put out there. Can it be changed? It can be changed if you think about changing to the positive direction, improved, more mature. That can happen with great difficulty. The other way, it can be done with great ease. It can be destroyed with the greatest of ease and speed. But to improve the culture, if I can use the term in a simplistic way, there's very few success stories in that regard. This is the world we work in. This is the world I live in, culture analysis and improvement. And if I have to rate how many times we've been successful, I'd say maybe 1 in 3, 1 in 4 times. I think we've got a good record, but the stories are very few and far between. And in terms of changing that, it's part of how we change the whole organization. Todd said, you have got to change everything. And that is why it is almost impossible to achieve in many cases, because you have to start with what is your original intent with safety? Why do you want safety? And then once you've got that sorted out at the top of your organization, which is a great difficulty, then you can start to adjust your strategies to it, your systems. You can change your performance management systems, your leadership skills. It has to all flow from all of that in order to make that eventually happen. And how do you know you've changed it? Well, you won't know. Because if you think you've improved your culture and now you have less accidents, you've gone the wrong direction. My experience is that if you improve the culture in the organization and people are more readily, reporting and differing in the organization, you actually have an increase in accidents. And to me, that would be a good sign that you're actually on the improve. The other way around, very, very difficult to achieve in any in a normal day of managing safety.
So success is more injuries.
Success is actually more important than injuries. Those injuries were there. They were there. They were just not reported. And you'd be amazed. I've seen companies hide fatal accidents. Never mind injuries. I've seen companies hide fatal accidents. I'll tell you the story one day. It is just mind-boggling how it's done.
Yeah, that's startling. I mean, I can see hiding a banged finger or something, but we always thought you can't hide these severe injuries and fatalities.
Well, if the worker is dying on a building site in, for instance, the Middle East, in Dubai, and he's dying, he's dead, the company charters the flight to transport the body to Bangladesh, reports the fatal accident there is not part of their stats. One way.
Oh my goodness. Okay, thank you, Corrie. So Todd, next question is for you. So I'm in safety, and I often hear how expensive safety is, because there is a cost to it. But my question for you is, does the safety function contribute to the bottom line of a company?
So I think I would go back to the answer we just did with the safety management system versus the ops management system. Is the bottom line is, we know, and we can make a pretty good case, that a stable, well-managed operations has fewer failures, fewer quality defects, fewer environmental defects or releases, fewer injuries, right? Fewer failures. And we can make a case that the reason that's so is because they have higher levels of recoverability. The idea that we could go into a boardroom and have a return on investment conversation with the chief financial officer, I think is foolish. It's really more of a question of, how does the company want to do its work? Does it want to have a resilient, robust, and reliable system? And if so, there's a cost to that at every side of the business. There's a cost on the ops side, there's a cost on the logistics side, there's a cost on the HR side. And you can just pick every single part of your business and say, if our goal is to have this robust, reliable, resilient operations globally, then we're going to have to invest to ensure we have the capacity to do that. I understand why everybody wants to make a really strong argument that the cost is worth it. But I kind of also think there are better people to argue cost than us. I mean, if we were interested in finance, we'd probably be finance people. right? I mean, I find it tedious and kind of boring. And every meeting I have to go where I have to do budgets, I'd like to poke my eyes out with sticks. That's how fun budget meetings are. But I also think the idea that somehow building a case that the investment in safety is worth it is really a desperate attempt to legitimize safety and to justify the reason they're at the table. And I actually think companies that are struggling with that probably ought to go back to first principles and say, how serious are we about actually having reliable, resilient, robust performance in our work everywhere we do the work? I don't know if that's a good answer. Corey, you can jump in and fill in the blanks, but that's kind of where I am on that topic.
Todd, yes, I think there's a real risk or a threat when we start putting money to it. Because that tells people why you want safety. That sends the worst message you can possibly send out to an organization, that if we are safe, we'll save money. That is not robust, resilient excellence in an organization. I would be horrified if I sit deep underground in an organization, like on my photo, my background there, and the leadership tells me I got to be safe so that we have more money in the company's coffers in the end. Absolutely not. So yeah, I think that's such a wrong message, and a complicated message too.
The interesting thing that has come out of the pandemic, at least from my observation, is that I think before the pandemic, pretty much organizations were optimized to create efficiency, better, faster, cheaper. And the pandemic has been a really loud signal event that has changed the dialogue, at least in the organizations that I'm fortunate enough to listen to the dialogue in. And now there's a very compelling case being made at the highest levels of the organization that they also must optimize for resiliency. And the story I would tell is I was working with a senior leadership team of a really big company, and the safety guy kind of got upset. And he said, and I was watching this whole thing, he said to the CEO, he said, if I would have told you 2 years ago that I need $1 million to buy face masks and a warehouse to store them in, you would have walked me out of the conference room, and probably it would have destroyed my career. And yet, in the midst of the pandemic, the question you asked me is, why don't we have $1 million worth of face masks, and why don't we have them stored and ready? And that little illustration, I think, is an important part of our ability to bounce forward from this uncertainty and be better. I think the time has never been better to build a case for having resiliency in our systems, having recoverability in our systems. And I think that's an important conversation we should be having.
So true.
Great responses. I like how that ties into what Corrie was just talking about with culture. If leadership is asking, why am I spending so much on safety? That's going to foster a pretty poor culture, in my opinion.
Yeah.
So Corrie, back to you on kind of the latest and greatest thing. We were talked about psychological safety. Now, how about new view and safety differently? Is that a fad that will fade away one day?
Yeah, it's the same discussion as psychological safety, except much bigger and much broader in so many ways. But the new view of safety is almost an idea, an approach, a model that has been waiting to come to the fore for decades now, and it's almost as if it's been suppressed by various other things, especially the advent of BBS. I remember when I started my career as a human resource manager, and then I went into safety as soon as 6 months later, and I had to start studying what is safety all about. And I read a book of an old author, Dan Peterson, on techniques in safety management or something like that. And if you have a look, and I read a very simple simple statement, and there was unsafe acts and unsafe conditions and actions are all symptoms of something that went wrong in the management system. This is the notion that you have to fix work upstream. You have to focus upstream in the way we plan processes, and that unsafe behavior downstream is actually normal human behavior, he said. It is the result of normal people reacting normally to their environments. That is essentially the one of the core elements of the new view. So why hasn't it come to the fore then? Well, even before that, I think the first, or maybe one of the early new view thinkers were actually Edward Deming. If you look at his principles that he put forward in terms of those 14 principles of, the quality movement is pretty much gone today because they became so integrated. And things that he said was drive out fear as one of his principles, eliminate slogans, eliminate quotas for people to achieve, and make people pride in their workmanship, leadership, and create constancy. These are all fundamentals of solid new view safety. So in the end, I think, will it fade away? I don't think it's really started yet. There are companies that are starting to embark upon this. Some go a bit halfway and fall out of it and say, no, this is too complicated, or whatever they say. I've seen a few of those. So I don't think we've moved the needle much yet. There's a lot of, there's still too much focus on simplicity in safety. If I was a CEO, and I'd say to you, I've got this incredible safety approach for you. It is extremely complicated. You're going to have to, you can't measure it. It's going to increase the reporting of accidents, and it's going to really make every person at the front end, we have to give them new skill sets. Or I have a safety system for you. It's called the ABC. Safety is very simple. Just always be careful. We just train people to be careful, to be mindful, to keep their eyes on the jobs that they're doing. And we're going to train them about being in a line of fire. And we're going to tell them, don't make poor choices. That's 4 simple things that I'm going to do to your workers. Which one am I going to select? Okay, let's do that one. Surely the worker is a problem. And I think there is something wrong with the whole, almost from executive level in organizations. What kind of questions are we asking about safety? What kind of metrics do we want from the organization to tell us where we're going in safety? That is still the problem. We haven't moved beyond that much. And unfortunately, I think we haven't started enough yet. But once this is taken, to me, the quality movement is the example. They've embraced, operational managers embraced the whole process. Granted, with simplistic tools. They were given and trained the simple tools, statistics here and there, and they've taken it on board, and they've integrated quality into the operational processes, the topic we talked about earlier on. But unless we can get to that level and get safety so integrated into the organization where it's embraced by the operational management, I don't think we're going to get much further than this, and it will be a fad that's going to fade away, and we're going to be stumbling from simplicity to simplicity. So hopefully we can change the questions that are being asked at the highest levels of the organization.
Which I think you just hit it on the nose. I think one of the fears that I have is that this new way of defining safety, which really is similar to the journey that quality had, and I agree with you 100%. I think Deming's 14 points are foundational place to point to. It really means that the group that has to change the most are not the workers. The group that has to change the most, accountability for success, moves closer to the boss's desk and farther away from the worker. And traditionally what we've said is we'll be successful if we hold workers accountable, right? So we give them accountability for being safe what we've learned, and we learned it through quality, is that defects take their birth far in the process, far away from where the defect is discovered. And so we have to realize that as we have these conversations, it's a direct threat to leaders and the traditional way they've looked at leading organizations. When they look at events and they change the question from who failed to what failed, the answer gets closer to their desk, not farther away from their desk.
Absolutely. I love that.
Good response. Todd, I have a question for you, and Corrie kind of touched on it earlier, but I just want to ask it straight out. Can we achieve fatality-free and injury-free at the same time?
No. The answer is no.
Okay, why?
Whoa, oh, so there's more to that question? Because
I also say no, but
I'm not letting you off that easy. Tell me why.
Everyone wants a yes or no question in a discussion like this. So because the things that hurt workers aren't the same things that kill workers. In fact, I would suggest that injury-free and fatality-free are counter-varying approaches. They're enemies of each other.
Absolutely.
That if we're serious about not killing people, then we have to make it okay to hurt people.
Simple, absolutely simple truth. There's no question about that.
And nobody's going to like what we just said.
No one is going to accept that. That's not palatable at all.
We peed in their breakfast cereal.
Yeah.
It's a tough question, and I agree. The causes are usually different. What causes an injury versus a fatality? So the harder question, Todd, it's all embedded here.
Yes.
Okay, if we accept this as a truth, that you can't have injury-free and fatality-free, how do I go to senior leadership and convince them to accept the safety model that doesn't measure safety as the absence of accidents? Because they've been drive to zero, drive to zero, drive to zero. How do you convince them to make that pivot?
Well, so two things. One is you realize that you're a teacher, not a debater, and that we have to attach new knowledge to old knowledge. And we have to somehow give them an arc of development that lets them understand why we went through the phase 0, 0, 0. Why we went through the phase that every accident is preventable, and how that really set up an artificial belief that somehow companies kill people because they failed to prevent the accident. So accidents are accidents. They're unintentional deviations from expected outcomes. They're surprises, right? And every accident is in fact preventable after it happened, because we're geniuses after something happens. The problem is that what we want to do is tell them that all the time that we spent preventing accidents, which is valuable and we should do it, and it makes a difference. We want to remove sharp, pointy things so they don't poke people. That time is not the same investment in actually not killing people. And if you want to really go to the origin of most of the arguments, it's probably the Heinrich pyramid and the way it's been misused historically for years. We've told senior leaders if they take care of the ankle sprains, they will by definition be also taking care of the fatalities. And that's wrong. And so we have to carefully and kindly attach this new knowledge, this paradigm shift, to the old thinking. And it's the most important work we'll do. But you really have to sit down with that group of people and say, if you're serious about not killing people, it has to be okay to hurt people. And then the question I would ask them is, would you trade a broken arm for a dead body? And the answer will be, of course. I mean, they're going to say yes in about a split second. Then you have to say, okay, when a person falls in their harness and it catches them and it slams them into the wall and it breaks their arm, that's a success. Because the logical outcome to that is they didn't have the harness on and they fall to their death. You can't treat that broken arm as if it's a failure. In fact, that broken arm, in this case, in this context, is an amazingly measurable and identifiable moment of success in our system. But you just have to teach them. When they get defensive and push back, we become more instructive, because the only reason they're pushing back is because they really believe, well, we should have prevented that guy from falling in the first place. Well, we can't, because it's an accident. I mean, the reason he was in fall protection was not to stop him from falling. It was to stop him from dying. And the injuries associated with a fall protection event aren't failures, they're successes. But that's kind of an ongoing conversation. I mean, you just have to keep having that conversation. And I would add one other thing, and then I should not be so chatty. I don't think we talk about success enough. I don't think we talk about all the places where our systems work, our defenses work, our safeguards work, our controls work, and actually avoided the accident that could have happened.
That's great. It is a continuous conversation. It's not one that'll stop with just a one time. So Corrie, we have a couple minutes left. Do you want to respond to that same question? Because I think that's an important one.
Yeah, maybe if I respond with it with a quick little story, 2 minutes. An executive of a big mining company one day had his executive team, global team, in a room pre-COVID days, and he had, each person had this audience response clickers, and so he asked the question, "Are you committed to safety?" And there were 30 people in the room, 30 numbers come up on the screen, and he asked a few more questions, and then he asked this question: would you place a member of your own family in the most dangerous part of the most dangerous mine under your control? Would you put a family member to work there? And 2 people pressed the button. 2 agreed that they would. And he said, there's 28 people here that wouldn't do that. But, and the discussion went this way, when one of the executives said, you know, it hit me between the eyes, because we are putting other people's families in the most dangerous parts of our minds. And they changed their vision statement to safe enough for our families. Safe enough so we can take our families to our workplaces. And they had an open day after that, of a safety day, and all the workers' families came, and they actually took their families underground and showed them a condition like this. This is where I work, and you're safe here. Now, to me, that is this foundational principle of safety, and in terms of why do we do it? And I can't think of a better example of you know, what I want in safety is going to make a huge difference to the people at the front end of the business, where they're actually dying and or can die.
That's very well stated, Corrie. Thank you. And thank you everyone for joining Corrie, Todd, and I for the debate to end all safety debates, Corrie versus Todd. I hope you learned something new that you can apply, and that we make all our companies safe enough for our families, as Corrie just said.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.
Really great job. Amazing talk. I wish it could just go on. Karen, can't thank you enough. You held their feet to the fire. You didn't let them off the hook. Even Todd had a one-word answer there for one point, and you didn't let him off the hook. So great job moderating the debate. These two are definitely not easy to handle. So awesome job, Corrie and Todd. Can't thank you guys enough for doing this and working together. You know, you share a lot of the same views, so it's kind of hard to put you in a debate with each other. But excellent questions and excellent answers and discussion. So really appreciate it. Definitely was worth it for the audience. And now for the audience, what we're going to do, we'll do this one a little bit different. So head on over to the Safety Justice League Lounge. And thanks to Karen Studi and the Dow Chemical Company, we have got a ton of spins on the wheel coming up. So huge thank you to them, the Dow Chemical Company, for being so gracious and sponsoring the debate, and for Karen putting in her time and being so gracious with her time to moderate the debate. So head over to the lounge before the next talk, and we'll talk to you soon.